Chapter 29 First Impressions Summary. How are Katsuki, Izuku, and Ochako reacting to this situation? Katsuki was getting impatient. He could guess what Uraraka really meant when she pulled Deku away for a break. He could see that he was getting overwhelmed, and he was glad Roundface led him to the side so we could break down in private. Katsuki was really done with today. They didn't even end up getting much information on the traffickers. They knew the species of the alien that originally had abducted them was called Glockabari, and a whole bunch of new information on space quirks. Deku seemed to be doing better when he asked about that stuff, probably about to nerd out, but the alien's threat caused him to freeze right back up. Honestly, where did that bastard get off threatening them like that? Katsuki should have blown him into the ground. But he's glad that they're out of that sketchy place. Now all that's left is to wait for Roundface to calm Deku down enough for them to head back. But they were taking forever. It had to have been at least 15 minutes since they stepped into that alley. Katsuki had been glancing over to the entrance every minute to see if they were done yet, and he was getting ready to just go in there himself. He's not sure what he'd be able to do to get the nerd to calm down, but whatever Uraraka is doing sure wasn't working. Ugh, Denki groaned. What is taking so long? I'm bored. Okay, that's it. He's going. I'll go see what's taking them so long. Stay put. Katsuki grunted. Thankfully, the others did what he said. Maybe they could feel that he was nearing the end of his rope. He'd been snapping a lot less than he did back on Earth, but he still had his moments. So he was glad the others stayed out of his way as he marched over to the alley to find nothing. The alley was empty, except it wasn't an alley. It was more of a back street with an opening on the other side. He was about to continue down the dark path to find wherever the two of them had run off to, when he noticed something on the ground. A small dash of deep crimson. His eyes frantically searched the alley for a sign that the picture his brain had started to paint was wrong, but all it led him to was a loose shoe discarded against the wall. It looked almost like it had been kicked off in some sort of panic. It was Uraraka's shoe. Deku and Uraraka were nowhere to be found. Things come back slowly for Izuku. Just a haze of gray at first, then a dull throbbing in the back of his head. Why does his head hurt? Then he felt a shiver rack his body. He was cold. Where was the normal heat from the others around him when he woke up? The ground was too hard, like cement. So unlike the comforting grass or blankets he had grown used to. Too like the cold metal cage that still haunted his nightmares. The thought sent a sudden jolt of fear through him that edged him further into consciousness. Something wasn't right. An unfamiliar feeling of scratchy rope rubbed against sensitive skin when he tried to move his arms from the uncomfortable position behind his back. Something really wasn't right. Consciousness came back faster and faster with each thing he noticed. The feeling of his legs bound all the way up to his thighs, arms all the way to his forearms and uncomfortably secured to his torso. A now damp gag wedged between his teeth that wrapped around to the back of his head. His breathing picked up as he managed to crack his eyes open. The space was dimly lit, just about illuminating what had to be some sort of warehouse-like building found in the nearby industrial district. The little light present made Izuku's brain twinge in discomfort. He tried to test the ropes he was bound with, but the splintery texture cut into his skin at the smallest movement. He could already feel a coolness that could only be blood pouring around his wrist. No. This couldn't be happening. Izuku couldn't help but thrash against his bonds, despite the little splinters of rope being embedded in his skin, and the abrasions causing even more blood to start dripping down his bare arms. His breaths were coming in short gasps behind the gag. Panic was welling in his brain, and it reconstructed the last things he remembered. The horrifying alien in the alley, and then darkness. The pain in the back of his head probably had something to do with that, but Izuku couldn't even begin to think about that when all his brain could focus on was that he was trapped, helpless, useless, captured. It took a few minutes for Ochako to fully come round. Her lungs still hurt from before, when the blue octopus-like alien covered her mouth and wrapped his appendage-like hair around her throat. She had immediately used her quirk to make him float, but almost immediately his feet were suctioned to the floor with what appeared to be natural suction cups, just like the ones that held his tight tentacles around her throat until she couldn't keep her eyes open any longer. No matter how hard she kicked and flailed, she couldn't escape. Ochako had seen another alien picking up an unconscious Izuku before she lost consciousness herself. The slight dribble of blood from his head was something to be concerned about. When she finally came to her senses, Ochako squirmed around in her bonds to try and get up. She could hear the panicked breathing of who she could only assume to be Deku beside her. She needed to help him. How? She didn't know, but he needed her. It seemed that the alien captors had taken note of her quirk, as her hands were covered with what felt to be a heavy burlap-like bag, secured tightly to her wrists by a rope. She could also feel her ankles securely bound and an uncomfortable gag in her mouth, but she still had enough mobility to eventually get herself into an upright position. The first thing she noticed was the looming shape of a bulky green sentient with crystal-like horns, the alien that had grabbed Deku. They were just staring at her, with a sly grin that showed their sharp teeth. Teeth, she knew, were a clear sign of aggression. A quick shudder took her bound form as they stared on. They sat there, in silence, for a few moments before a heavy-duty door she hadn't noticed swung open. Emerging from the passage was the octopus-like alien that had choked her into unconsciousness. Their face looked surprisingly normal, handsome even, compared to the disturbing sight of a curled maw with rows of spindly teeth she had last bore witness to only. How long had passed? Had it only been minutes? Hours? Days? Did the others know they were gone? Were they coming for them? Ochako mentally scolded herself as her panic began to recede. Of course they were coming for them. This wasn't like last time. They were still on the planet. The others would come for them soon. They would find them. Ochako just needed to make sure nothing bad happened between then and now. So, she waited calmly as the slimy blue alien joined the bulky green one in front of her. Or in front of them. Ochako risked a glance to the side to find Izuku bound beside her. But unlike her, he was restrained much more thoroughly. Legs completely secured together the whole way up. Arms tethered behind his back and anchored to his torso. It looked like he could barely move. She felt herself pale as her eyes traced over his skin. She was lucky enough that the bag they had used created a safe barrier between rope and skin. But Izuku? A previous struggle against the frayed yellow rope was obvious by the deep, red blood that lazily flowed down his arms. She couldn't tell if his more thorough restrainment was from sexism or the fact they didn't know his quirk. He was turned away from her, but she could just about make up his screwed-shut eyes and still panicked breaths he wheezed into the quiet room. She would have to be strong for both of them. Settling back onto the two captors in front of her, she narrowed her eyes. The tentacled alien was smiling, just as menacingly as the horned one, as he began to speak. "Looks like the Terrans have finally woken up," he said with a pompous voice. "The catch of the year, I do say. How'd you lot get this far away from your dump of a planet?" The mocking tone in the cerulean alien's voice was clear. He was now circling the pair while the other stood stone-faced. Izuku's eyes were open at this point, and he followed the alien's shiny brown boots whenever they re-entered his view. Breathing less shakily now that he had something to focus his attention on. But Ochako wasn't sure he was all there when she caught the distant, foggy look in his eyes. She had to stay strong.